What if you've never actually seen reality? Not because you're dreaming, but because your mind, by its very nature, shapes what you experience before you're even aware of it. This wasn't a science fiction idea. It was the radical claim of one of the most important philosophers in history, Immanuel Kant. Kant didn't just question what we know, he questioned how we know anything at all. He argued that space and time aren't features of the external world, they're structures of the mind, causality. Not something we find out there in nature, but a framework our minds impose in order to make sense of what we experience. According to Kant, what we call reality isn't the world as it is. It's the world as it appears, filtered and shaped by the mind's own architecture. This idea was so revolutionary that Kant compared it to a Copernican revolution in philosophy. Just as Copernicus showed that the Earth moves around the sun, and not the other way around, Kant argued that objects conform to our way of knowing, not the other way around. What we perceive, in other words, is never the world as it is in itself, but only the world as it appears to us. Immanuel Kant was born in 1724 in the East Prussian city of Königsberg, now Kaliningrad, Russia, and for most of his life, he never left its borders. Kant was legendary for his extremely strict daily schedule. He reportedly woke up, ate, taught, read, and walked at the same time every day with near mechanical precision. According to local folklore, residents of Königsberg would set their watches by his 3:30 p.m. walk. Despite this seemingly narrow geographical footprint, his intellectual reach was immense. Kant emerged at a time when philosophy was caught between two dominant currents. The rationalism of thinkers like Descartes and Leibniz, who believed that knowledge could be derived through reason alone, and the empiricism of Locke and Hume, who insisted that all knowledge comes from sensory experience. But Hume, in particular, pushed empiricism to its breaking point. He showed that we couldn't even justify our belief in causality, that when one event follows another, we don't see a necessary connection, only a habit of thought. This skeptical challenge shook Kant and forced him to rethink everything. Kant called this his awakening from dogmatic slumber. Rather than accept Hume's skepticism or retreat into rationalist abstraction, Kant asked a different kind of question. What must be true about the mind for experience and knowledge to be possible at all? This was the beginning of a new way of thinking, one that didn't take perception or thought for granted, but investigated the very conditions that made them possible. The result was Kant's theory of transcendental idealism, outlined in his monumental work, The Critique of Pure Reason. He argued that the mind brings its own structure to experience, what he called the a priori conditions of knowledge. These include space and time as forms of intuition, and 12 categories of the understanding, like causality, plurality, unity, and substance. These aren't things we observe in the world. They're tools the mind uses to organize what it receives. Without them, there would be no coherent experience, just a chaotic stream of impressions. This distinction between what we can experience and what lies beyond experience is central to Kant's philosophy. He draws a sharp line between the phenomenal world, the world as it appears to us through the structures of our mind, and the noumenal world, the world as it is in itself, independent of our perception. And crucially, Kant claims that the noumenal world is unknowable. We can never step outside our own cognitive framework to see what reality is like apart from our experience of it. In one sense, this might sound limiting, but for Kant, it was a liberation. It explained why mathematics and Newtonian physics could yield universally valid knowledge. Not because they mirror some external objective reality, but because they describe how any rational mind must structure experience. This was the key to resolving the tension between rationalism and empiricism, and it offered a new, compelling account of how certainty and knowledge are possible at all. Kant's theory, though abstract, has had lasting consequences far beyond the bounds of academic philosophy. His insight that the mind contributes something essential to the structure of experience reverberates through modern disciplines, from cognitive science to theoretical physics. In cognitive psychology, for instance, researchers now recognize that what we perceive is not simply a passive imprint of external stimuli. The brain filters, organizes, and interprets sensory data through pre-existing frameworks, much as Kant described. The fact that two people can look at the same scene and interpret it differently isn't just a matter of perspective or bias. It's a reflection of how the mind imposes structure on the raw data of experience. In this sense, Kant's categories of understanding anticipate later developments in how we think about mental models, pattern recognition, and even the limits of objectivity. Kant's influence also extends into the philosophy of science. By arguing that the conditions of experience are what make scientific knowledge possible, he reframed the role of empirical investigation. For Kant, science doesn't uncover the world as it is in itself. It uncovers the necessary rules by which phenomena appear to us. This perspective provided the intellectual foundation for later thinkers, such as Ernst Cassirer, who extended Kantian ideas into symbolic forms, and even influenced Einstein, who admired Kant's notion that space and time are not independent realities. While Kant's exploration of knowledge and perception forms the foundation of his critical philosophy, it's impossible to fully appreciate his thought without touching on its ethical dimension. For Kant, the mind doesn't just structure how we perceive the world, it also provides the conditions for how we ought to act within it. His practical philosophy emerges directly from the same rational capacities that shape experience. And just as our understanding of the world is guided by a priori categories, so too is moral action governed by a priori principles of reason. Central to Kant's moral philosophy is the idea of the categorical imperative, a principle he believed could serve as the foundation of universal ethics. The most well-known formulation of this imperative is deceptively simple. Act only according to that maxim whereby you can, at the same time, will that it should become a universal law. What Kant means here is not a vague appeal to doing what feels right or what brings the greatest happiness, but a strict demand for logical consistency and universality. If the rule you follow cannot be applied to everyone without contradiction, then it fails the test of moral validity. This is a profound departure from the moral philosophies of both his predecessors and his contemporaries. Unlike utilitarianism, which bases moral worth on consequences, Kant insists that the moral worth of an action lies in the motive behind it, the intention to act out of duty in accordance with reason. We are not moral because we desire good outcomes. We are moral when we act out of respect for the moral law that reason gives to itself. What makes this especially powerful is that Kant believed such moral laws are binding not because they come from some external authority, whether divine or societal, but because they arise from the very structure of rational agency. To be a rational being is, for Kant, to be capable of legislating moral law for oneself. This gives his ethics a unique dignity and autonomy, rooted in the idea that each person is an end in themselves, never a means to someone else's end. If you find yourself intrigued by the idea that we never access reality as it is, but only as it appears through the lens of our own minds, you're not alone. Kant invites us to think critically about the assumptions we carry, the knowledge we claim, and the freedom we pursue. His work doesn't close philosophical questions, it opens them. And it leaves us with a challenge that is as much ethical as it is intellectual. To become conscious of the hidden structures that shape not just our knowledge, but our lives. If you found value in this video, please hit the thumbs up button and subscribe. It really helps the channel. And join us on our journey of discovering ourselves, the world around us, and the greatest minds and ideas. Thank you very much for watching.